Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the BJJ Foxcast. I am your host, Alex Martinez, and today I am really excited to have the world traveler, Scott Burr, on the show. Scott is an author of several books, including Worth Defending by Richard Bressler and Opening the Closed Guard with Robert Drysdale, and among others. He is a second-degree black belt under Steve Maxwell and founder of Enclave Jiu Jitsu. Scott, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Tell me about your recent travels, dude. You were in California?
Yeah, this was a funny trip. I was like, I had this. Okay, here let's go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah,
I have a 2003 Honda Element, which, as far as I'm concerned, is like one of the greatest cars ever made.
Yeah,
I love that thing. Okay. And I had a little tow behind camper that I was super psyched on, a little fiberglass thing.
Yeah.
And my mechanic, who's also one of my jiu-jitsu students, this year he was like, "Look, man, this thing can't tow anymore. Like mechanically it's good, but the road salt in Ohio where I live just eats cars."
Yeah.
And he's like, "It's a 20-year-old car. It's probably time to figure out what to do." So I was like, well, all I really want is another one of these. So we looked all over the place, and we found a 2011, which was the last year they made them, in Sedona. And I was like, okay, so fly out with me and look over the car, and then we'll drive to L.A., and we'll hook up with Howder, and we'll try to hook up with Hickson. And because he's never been to, the whole L.A. jiu-jitsu scene.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So that's how that.
That's how they.
So yeah, we Chris was nice. Chris and Melissa were nice enough to let us crash in their back cabin. Yeah. And we hung out for a little bit. He had to fly back to get back to work, but I was out there. Now I'm driving back east.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So it worked out. I mean, kind of a cool little trip, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's been really, really cool. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
A bunch of time with Chris, some time with Hickson, and then got to reconnect with a bunch of LA friends and just, I got to meet actually there were a bunch of guys in town sort of hubbing out of Chris's to do privates with Hickson that I had sort of seen or crossed paths with briefly, and I actually got to spend a bunch of time with them, like Michael Casey and Joe Mendoza and Chris Burns, and I got to actually hang out with those guys, and it was really really cool to hang out with them. And it was like we had a really it was really nice. I kind of feel like we all kind of became fast friends, and we just hung out a bunch. So
it
was great. Yeah.
Did you grow up in Ohio?
I did.
Okay. And what's your connection with the West Coast and Hickson and those guys?
Just Hickson. I mean, Hickson was the whole reason to go out there.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. When we connected with him, we started just flying out to go train with him, and became friends with Howder sort of around that, and just travel more. Yeah,
because when Chris was on the podcast, he was talking about going back and training with Hickson.
Yeah,
and just learning the feel that Hickson has, and I thought that was really interesting that a guy 6th-degree black belt still goes back to an old coach. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And just learns, because it's a never-ending process, right?
Not only is it a never-ending process, but I feel like. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot as I've been spending this time with Chris. Chris is, for a guy, and Richard is the same thing, where you have a guy who's a 6th-degree black belt. He's one of the highest-ranking Americans in this art, and the genuine humility, and the genuine no, I'm a student. I'm another dude on the mat. I'm still trying to figure this out. There's no arrogance around the knowledge. There's obviously a regard for the knowledge, but he's just like, no, I need, and Chris, to be around that, to see that modeled, has been a real gift hanging out with Chris. He's really genuinely a guy who hang out in his garage on a Sunday open mat, and everybody comes in, some purple belt will come in who's a student of somebody else. They'll do something, and he'll like, okay, wait, what'd you do? Show me that. Okay, that's cool. Okay, what is this?
Wow.
Just no ego about it at all.
Yeah.
In a really, I mean, I don't know that I'd be able to do. I mean, it's not everybody can do that when they have the weight of that belt on them. And Chris just whatever.
Yeah. And I really got that from him. Just interviewing the guy. Like, he's a very genuine, open person, and he almost seemed as nervous as I was to be on the show.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like, I was super nervous to get him on, but just once we loosened up, he starts talking about the fifth dimension and
right,
and
oh right, yeah,
and all kinds of stuff. So I want to talk about let's kind of circle back and close the loop on the the reason you went to California was to record with Rickson, right?
Going to California this time was I've done a couple of I've had the profound privilege of recording a couple of times with him.
Nice.
The past few times I was out last summer and we filmed some stuff for his site, and then I was there again in the fall, and then coming out again I was able to get together with him again. So it's kind of been like anytime I'm out there, I'm trying to get together with him and if he's got a use for me, like make sure I'm available for that.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so that was definitely in the back of my mind when we were like, it's like, okay, we found a car in Sedona. I'm like, okay, and then we're gonna drive to LA, right? Because we're just gonna show up and he's gonna have to tell us to go away,
to leave.
We're just gonna hang out. It was like that. What was it? Burns was just comparing it to that scene in Fight Club where they have to stand on the doorstep.
Oh,
for
yeah,
3 days.
for 3 days.
I'm gonna go back inside and I'm gonna get a shovel. It was a little bit like that.
Yeah, no, that's cool, man. That's cool. So, so you're working on a book with Chris Hauter.
Yes,
and so having him on the show, he's got a lot of great stories and a lot of great tangents. Tell me about the process. Like, when you're living your life, right, regardless of you may think, okay, this is a historic moment, right? Or maybe not. You just kind of live your life, right? And then all of a sudden a guy comes up to you, Scott Burr comes up to you and says, dude, we got to put your life on paper.
Yeah.
Oh shit, I never journaled, right? What's that process like? How do you get somebody to remember all of the stuff that they did? What's that process like?
Well, so Chris approached me about this.
Okay.
Chris had been, there's the famous sort of elusive Chris Hauter graphic novel that people have maybe heard about, that he's working, there was a video that came out maybe 6-7 years ago where he was talking about this graphic novel he's writing about sort of a post-apocalyptic renaissance where people are rediscovering knowledge from before this cataclysm, and so within that he's been writing for quite a while, and with kind of the idea, I think, that he's going to write a book of his story, because his story is bigger and crazier than the American Jiu Jitsu part, which is also big and crazy.
Yeah.
So it's a big crazy story. And so within that, he has writing that he's done. I think he sent me everything he'd written. He'd written something like 30,000, 35,000 words, something like that, which is a decent chunk of writing. It's like maybe 100, 150 pages. But it's broken up. It's fragmented. It's notes. Some of it is longer essays. Some of it is just paragraphs, and a lot of it, as you might expect with him, pertains to traveling to teach seminars. Yeah. And some of the childhood and the adolescent and all those parts weren't as written out, even though there were some chunks. And he basically arrived at a point where he said, I'm too ADD to do this. I'm not going to get this done. And I, at that point, he approached me. This was like last summer. I was heading out there, and right before I headed out, he sent me a text. He was like, how do I, what would it look like if we worked on this book together? Yeah. And at this point, I had edited and helped Drysdale put out his book, and then I had co-authored and we'd put out Richard's book, and then I'd done co-authored two other books. One about the patent system, which was crazy. Yeah, and
the shark in the blood in the water.
Blood in the water.
Yeah. I'm gonna order that one today.
It's a good read, but it's discouraging. Yeah, the patent system is a mess. Wow. And then another one, Confessions of a Hollywood Trainer with John Petrelli, which just came out, and he was like, so you're the guy who can help me put this together. And so basically, he sent me everything he had. And then we basically got together, and and I don't want to I don't want to give too much away with the book, but we talk about this in the book. Basically, we were staying up in Highland Park. I'd drive down every day. I'd sit in the middle of the mat at the combat base garage with my, computer recording the audio, and he would walk around me in a circle for hours.
That's exactly what I envisioned.
It was.
That's exactly what I envisioned.
The most Chris Howder version of this, and starting with his childhood growing up, and all the way through through basically feeling like his current feeling like democracy is coming apart, and and all of everything in between.
Yeah, yeah. And in contrast, what was Richard Bressler like to work with?
The interesting thing about Richard, and I'm sure you got this talking to him, he absolutely believes in the vital importance of jiu-jitsu and what the Gracies did for him, and what the art has to offer people. But getting him to recognize the value of his own story was a bigger challenge than I would have imagined. I mean, he is a really profoundly humble guy, and so to get him to sort of go into his own story and his own evolution, that was more of our conversation, because a lot of his story I could get from other interviews or podcasts. We would go over it, but that story. Okay, when did he meet Horian? How did they meet? How did he? What was it like when Hoist came, loaning Horian the money to start the academy, loaning him money for the UFC? All those parts. That's people ask about that on podcasts, and you can find that information. But the stuff about where were you at in your life? What did this do for you on a personal level? And then those other elements, the sort of healing himself emotionally, healing it, starting to really come to value himself as a teacher, and that process was it wasn't a challenge to get him to talk about it, but that was the bulk of our conversation, was trying to have that conversation around that.
Yeah. So and where do you think that comes from? I mean, obviously, like you mentioned the word humility, and it comes through in the book big time, and it came through in the podcast like unbelievably when he was talking about without a layoff, basically, doing jiu-jitsu consistently for 17 years and still not a black belt.
Yeah.
There's got to be some humility in there as well, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder, like, there's got to also be like some kind of drive, like no one is going to stop me kind of feel, right? And that's something that's deep down in Richard, and it comes through in the book. If you read it and you study because you can tell I studied it.
Right. Yeah.
If you really study what he talked about, what you guys wrote about, it comes through. He's a tough dude.
Yeah.
He's a very tough dude, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And it's an interesting question, because I think part of it is, they always say like, it's about the journey, not about the destination. And very clearly, and I think you're going to agree with me when I say this, it's like the reward for Richard was getting to be in this context where he was interacting with students. He's providing something valuable. They value him. He gets to give to them, and he's in that exchange. He's a guy who just clearly loves teaching jiu-jitsu. And so, 17 years without getting promoted to black belt, I don't feel like the black belt was the big reward for him.
Yep.
Right. Whereas, plenty of people we know in all martial arts, you get a black belt and it's kind of like, well, the fire goes out, and the fire for him he's 70 years old. The fire hasn't gone out.
Right.
Every day he wants to go teach this class. He wants to go see the students. He wants to share this art.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the real thing about him, is just the love of the art and the love of that teaching relationship he gets to have with students.
Yeah. And I mean, you've been around a lot of the more like you've been around the history of it quite a bit. I mean, your instructor was, what was he, 50 when you met him?
Yeah. What was he? He was in his early mid 50s.
Yeah. So he'd been around a little while.
Yep.
And you're exposed to Richard and to, other people. what do they all have in common? What is that common thread that the older guys have? That what keeps them going? What keeps them showing up and throwing on a gi and sweating it out on the mats?
That's a good question. What do they have in common?
Yeah, there's got to be a common thread, right? For those guys, 6-degree black belts, and just like, I don't know. There's something about there's got to be something in common there.
I think going back to what I was just saying about Richard, I think that, and probably going back to what I just said about like a lot of people kind of quitting after they get a black belt in different martial arts, when your own aggrandizement is the goal, when you think that you're, when it's about the ego rewards, when you stop getting those ego rewards, or you get the final ego reward that you thought you were going to get, and maybe it isn't as big a ego reward as you think it's going to be. I've had students who, you promote them to that belt that they wanted so bad, and then afterward there's this little bit of a funk. There's a little bit of a, they don't know what's wrong, but they feel the same. I'm the same guy.
Yeah.
I thought I'd be a purple belt. I thought I'd be a brown belt. I thought I'd feel like that thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the people who stick with it are the people who either that's not what it was about for them, or they get through that and they realize the rewards of connecting with students and connecting with this community and sharing with this community.
Yeah.
And connecting with this history, this being part of this thing.
Yeah.
Is the reward. And it's not really, you have the first edition of the book.
Yeah.
And we published a second edition, and in the second edition I wrote a foreword in which I say something to the effect of, I think it's normal when you're young, and Chris and I were actually just talking about this, that when you're young, you sort of see yourself as the star of the world's movie a lot of times. And within that movie, you have your struggle, and then you have your victory, and you get your black belt and whatever.
Yeah. And
that as you get older, you have the opportunity a lot of times to realize that something else is the star of the movie, and you get to be a part of that.
Yeah.
That jiu-jitsu maybe is the star of the movie, and I get the privilege of contributing to that in whatever capacity I have the privilege of contributing. And I think if there's one thing that has been the same in those old school guys, it's been that the focus is in how they are giving to this thing, that they're not the point anymore.
Gotcha. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, man. And there's just so few of them. That's why I'm so curious, right?
Yeah.
So, stupid question, okay? But I got to ask it. What's it like when you meet somebody and they're holding your book in their hand? What was it like the first time you saw that? What does that feel like?
I have like two dreams, right? And one of them is to walk onto a plane and see somebody reading a book that I wrote and get to like ask them without them knowing who I am. Oh, how is that? I've heard about that. Is that any good? Yeah. It's again related to the previous point. One of the things that so this is going to be a long answer.
That's okay.
To a short question. Yeah. But one of the things that I was a failed writer for a really long time. I'm not a super successful writer at this point, but I'm a more successful writer than I've ever been. And when I look back at those years and my attitude, I see the way in which my mentality was, I worked really hard on this. I think it's good by the standards that I understand are the standards for what makes something good. The world should recognize it.
Yeah.
And it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that that's just not how it works. And the reason it doesn't work like that is because people don't read things because you are owed their attention or affirmation. People read things because they get something from it.
Yeah.
I don't read a book to learn about you. I read a book to learn about myself.
Yeah.
And if you can articulate something that I've experienced in a way that I was unable to articulate it, you've given me something for myself that I can then use to understand myself better and maybe articulate myself better in the world. That's why I read. That's why you read. That's why everybody reads.
Yeah.
And the idea that I would read somebody's book, excuse me, just to give them an ego reward, I wouldn't do it, and I shouldn't expect other people to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the process of writing these books, and so I think my thinking started to shift in a healthful way, let's call it in my early to mid 30s.
Yeah.
Which is, again, embarrassingly late to grow up. But by the time I got to Richard's book and I had the opportunity to work on these different projects, I very much had an understanding around the fact that this is not for me. This is for you. This is I better be writing with you in mind. Even if I want to express myself, expressing myself has to be 49% of my drive.
Yeah.
51% I need to be thinking about what you're going to get from it and why you would give me your time and energy in exchange for what? What am I giving you in exchange for your time and energy? And so when I see the reviews of, this book, Richard's book and Petrelli's book and Kip's book and these and Drysdale's book, where people said, "Man, this really spoke to me." Particularly Richard's book and the Petrelli book, the Confessions of a Hollywood Trainer.
Yeah.
Very much about people who were headed down maybe a path that was not so good and turned their life around and learned some really valuable lessons that they want to share with people. The response to those books has been powerful. People have really gotten, according to what they've said, they've gotten a lot out of these books. And that is a profoundly rewarding experience to see that this has contributed something positive to somebody else's life.
Yeah.
And so, in answer to your question, what's it like to see somebody holding your book? Let's talk about somebody reviewing your book and saying this meant so much to me, right?
Yeah.
That is it's a very rewarding experience.
Yeah.
To know that you were able to, because, we've all been in, we've had low points, and to be somebody who has given somebody something in a low point is a real it's a privilege and it's a real gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, I'm hoping that that's what these books are doing for people, and it seems like they are a little bit.
Well, they absolutely are, and I'll give you like my history with that book. I bought it in December of 2020, and I tore through it in like a week and a half. I tore through it, and that may seem slow to a reader such as yourself, but for me, I have half read books all over the house. So I went cover to cover, and it just drew me in, and I was like, gosh. And one of the things that really stuck with me is I'm an aging grappler, man. I'm 50 years old, right? So I always think about like I'm an academy owner, and I have all these students. Like, what's my role?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can't train with a 25-year-old effectively anymore, right? But what I can offer, and that's something that Richard said, I can be the best coach they've ever had. I can study my ass off. I can hone the skills. I can study every little detail as best I can and teach that to the young guy who doesn't have the time to do that or the inclination, right? They just want to roll. They just want to train, right? So I can be the best coach I can be, right?
Yeah.
And that's something like, it gave me so much hope. I can still do this, right? I can still do this effectively at my age. I still train. I still train, almost every day. But there's going to come a time when we all get told, right, we can't do this anymore, right? And what's going to be your legacy? My legacy is going to be teaching. That's what I want it to be. But so anyway, I read through it, and I thought when I finished, I was like, God, I wish I could just pick this guy's brain just an hour. That's all I want is an hour. And 2 years almost to the day. I think I bought that book on December 20th, and he was on the podcast on December 23rd.
Wow.
2 years later. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, because I went back and, just out of curiosity, I went on Amazon, I checked when I bought it. I'm like, holy shit, almost to the day. And now I get you on the show. So I can pick your brain too, man. This is, I'm telling you, I'm humbled that you're here, man. It's really cool.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, man.
Yeah, man. So Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about jiu-jitsu, because my white belts that listen will kill me if I don't talk about jiu-jitsu.
All right.
So, what's your origin with jiu-jitsu? You did other martial arts, right?
I did a Korean style called Kuksul Do. You know, I was teenager, angry, all those things, wanted to learn how to fight. And the school in my town was the Kuksul Do Academy, and I had a friend who trained there, and he's like, come train to this, come check this out. And basically I went to one class and then just like was there for every class after that.
Yeah.
And went through that curriculum, got my black belt in that, and went away to college and kind of kept training, would come back in the summers and train. And then when I graduated and came home, it was right when The Ultimate Fighter hit.
Okay.
And so everybody at the academy had kind of like turned a corner.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, because it was a really cool, I mean, as evidenced by what I'm about to tell you, but like it was a really cool academy where everybody really respected the tradition. They really loved the art itself. They wanted to be really good at the art and preserve the art, but also practical fighting skills.
Yeah.
To the extent that was compatible with the core curriculum of Kuksul Do, which is, you know, it's another art that's a little bit formalized to the point of being inapplicable.
Yeah.
And so when The Ultimate Fighter came out, they're like, this is what's up. And, you know, you get that window in how these guys are training, what they're training, and all these things. And basically the head instructor, that my buddy Jason Zakrajcek, he was like, dude, we're gonna start bringing in Muay Thai, we're gonna start bringing in Jiu-Jitsu. That's it. And we're like, okay, great, hell yeah, let's do that. And so at that point, there were sort of two programs sort of coexisting in this one space, and then eventually, as myself and a couple other people sort of got more and more into moving away from the traditional Kuksul. Like I was at a point where the head of the Kuksul Federation was saying, okay, I want you to start testing for second degree and open up a Kuksul Academy. And I kind of had the decision to make between I was like, I remember very distinctly thinking I would much rather have a blue belt in jiu-jitsu than a second degree black belt in Kuksul Do.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's the point where it's pretty clear
Decision
what
made.
I want to do.
Yeah.
And so Jason actually rented out a second unit right next door in the light industrial complex. He put in a cage, he put in heavy bags, he did the whole thing. And he was bringing in these instructors. He had a kickboxing instructor named Ryan Madigan, who was a ranked kickboxer at one point, and jiu-jitsu instructor named Darren Branch, who is Jessica I's jiu-jitsu coach now. Yeah. He's a Hoyler black belt now. He was a blue belt back then. We were all like, you know, lower ranking guys back then. And we started doing a lot of MMA. We had a boxing coach. We did all those things. And then as time went on and I fell more and more in love with traditional Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and the student body kind of shifted that way too. We sort of, actually I remember very distinctly, I could probably blame it on like Brock Lesnar if I really wanted to, but there was a moment where we all kind of went like, I don't know if MMA is where I want to be anymore. And so did you ever train with Brock, or was it something that you just saw him on TV and you're like, screw this? Yeah, it was that thing where it's like, there was an era where it was like, Lyoto Machida, Anderson Silva, BJ Penn, George St. Pierre. Yep. It was like all those guys were like high level athletes, respectful guys. And it was that era, that kind of brief era where in order for the sport to be legitimized in the public eye, we were pitching the sport as a sport full of highly conditioned, highly intelligent athletes. Yep. And so Rich Franklin was the poster child because he was a math teacher, and then you had all these guys. And then the UFC, it felt like, made a decision where they were like, okay, we've established legitimacy. Now it's about the spectacle. Oh, gotcha. To get eyeballs on it. Yeah. And, you know, they brought Brock in and gave him a title shot pretty fast. Yep. It seemed like. And then it brought in all these fans that it was a different kind of culture around MMA. And so we were like, okay, maybe MMA is not where we're at spiritually. Yeah. Maybe jiu-jitsu is more. And we were falling in love with the art, and it's like, okay, we're going to focus on gi jiu-jitsu and the master text, and we took the cage out. We made one big matted area, became a jiu-jitsu school.
That's a tough decision to make, because I mean,
yeah, I guess,
yeah, that's a big commitment. And I run a purely jiu-jitsu school, so I love your decision. But that's a tough decision to make, man.
Yeah, it wasn't that tough because we didn't have that many people who really liked getting punched in the face.
Gotcha. That's good. That's good. That's a good demo right there.
It's not that hard a decision to make when most of your students are like, yeah, I'm not going to come to the kickboxing class. I'm going to come to the jiu-jitsu not get punched in the face class.
Yeah. So you have the Jiu-Jitsu Academy open. Are you teaching at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the beginning, it was kind of like we had Darren and Ryan were teaching. They were each teaching 1 day a week, and then I was sort of teaching like catch-all class, like basic MMA classes. I could teach some kicks and punches. I could teach some ground positions, and then sort of like as I learned more and their schedules changed and student interest changed and waned and stuff. Eventually, I took over kind of the whole that side of the business.
Gotcha. Okay, and what's your philosophy on coaching towards obviously we all love that we all love the martial art, but there's a sport aspect and there's a self-defense-ish aspect to it, right? So I hate to say ish, there's a self-defense aspect to this. But what do you key on if somebody's brand new, right? Do you key on more self-defense stuff, or do you is it more sport? What do you like to teach?
Well, I'm a more fundamental self-defense guy. Okay. I mean, and Steve was very much, even though Steve was a very successful competitor, he came up under everybody. I think he got his blue belt from Horian, he got his purple belt from Horian, he got his brown belt from Hoyce and Horian, and then he got his black belt from Helson.
Wow.
And so he came up as he was the way I initially heard Richard's name actually was because Steve was telling me, when I went through the instructor certification at the academy, the guy who really helped me was Richard. Richard knew all the self-defense front and back, how Horian wanted to teach it, how Horian wanted it done. And so that foundation from those guys, and then obviously Helson is known as the self-defense guy. Yep. The street fight guy. So that was a big part of the sort of the culture that we had created with Steve and then in our academy.
Yeah. And is the academy still open now?
No.
Okay. What happened with that?
I voluntarily closed it in 2019, end of 2019. I was feeling a little burned out, to put it lightly. Yeah. And it's interesting because actually I talk about it a bit in the foreword to the second edition of Richard's book, and then I talk about it more extensively in Howder's book. Okay. But basically, I was feeling pretty frustrated and pretty burned out, and I told Jason, I was like, I think I'm done teaching for a little while. I need to hear a voice that's not my own. I need to hear somebody else telling. I'm tired of being the guy with the answers. And so I said, do you want to find somebody else to run it? And he's like, nah, we'll just close it. So they closed that side, and then COVID hit. Yeah, which closed all the gyms for some never reopened, right? Yeah. And when that started to lift, Jason, who's also a Steve black belt, started up another issue that we sort of had, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this because obviously our own story is super interesting to ourselves, is that the culture in the gym, we called that side of the business was called the fight gym. And it starting as an MMA gym, it always had, we never really defined the culture in there. And I sort of tried to, but it was kind of like, because we already had a history as an MMA gym and a way we did things, it was sort of like we never got a clean slate when we started as a jiu-jitsu school. Gotcha. Somehow, energetically. It just never felt like a full refresh. Yeah. And when I was closing, I announced it 3 months shy of the closure, to give everybody time to find a new home or whatever, not just close the door and good luck.
Yeah.
But at one point I said to Jason, I was like, got toward the end of like the fight gym being open, I was like, dude, you know what? Like, you're a Steve Black Belt now, right? He had gotten promoted a couple of years after me. I was like, you're a Steve Black Belt. You have the black belt that's, that people want, right? They want to learn jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
They want to learn from a black belt. You're super personable. You're super. You're a great teacher. You are energized by teaching in a way that I'm not. I'm a little bit drained from the. I love teaching. I love going down wormholes with people.
Yeah.
Just figuring stuff out.
Yeah.
But the public interfacing is not really my superpower.
Gotcha.
And his is. And I was like, you could run a very traditional, like Valencia Brothers style, like especially in our town, and not have this like weird hard ass tough guy baggage, and just start fresh. And that's what he's doing now, and his program's blowing up. And so it's awesome. Yeah,
that's cool, man.
He's doing all kinds of cool stuff over there. So the fight gym's gone, but basically in that same location, there's a new jiu-jitsu program that's got a much more user-friendly interface. Yeah.
So you wanted to have somebody else's voice in your ear. Who is that? Who did you turn to? Who's that voice?
Hickson. Yep.
Yeah. How often do you train with Hickson?
It depends on the year. But I mean, it's like I'm traveling out from Ohio, so it's like a few times a year.
Yeah.
I see him. Which, I mean, anybody who trains with Hickson, it's kind of like that you could take like what you cover in an hour is you go take it for like 4 months.
Yeah.
And then come back and he'll look at all the ways you screwed it up, and then fix that, and you could go take that for 4 more months. So that's what I've kind of been doing.
Wow. Is he open to do that with just anybody, or is that something you kind of hit him up and say, hey, I'd like to do this program?
At the time, when I first met him, I kind of had to bug him to do it. But now I see that, like on his Instagram, you'll see him posting that, you can reach out, and there's an application process if you want to do a private lesson with him and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he is available for it. I don't know how many out of how many applications he takes or whatever.
Yeah. And what was it about you? I mean, you had a history with him, right? And that's kind of why he brought you in. Is that how that worked?
To do the filming?
Yeah. Well, no, just to train with him.
Well, no. So I, it was really, it was kind of a crazy experience. And I don't know if it looks crazy from the outside, but I basically spent, so 20, here's the long answer to a short question.
That's cool.
2017, for a couple of reasons, I feel like I aged about 5 years in 1 year in 2017 because I did a couple of things simultaneously that were really exhausting. So I'd been training with judo. 2017 was the big push to get my black belt in judo. So I was training a lot of judo, which if you know judo, that will beat you up.
Yeah, that's hard on the body.
I was also dealing with a lot of bureaucracy with judo because judo has a very established sort of bureaucracy around it, and that was very draining in its own way. I was also building our house.
Oh gosh.
Kind of by myself, so it was a really crazy story. And I, spoiler alert, this is some of this is going to be in Chris's book. I basically, do you want to hear a crazy story?
Yeah.
So my girlfriend and I had been living in the same apartment in our town for 7 years. And for 5 of those years, we didn't have a lease. We just knew the landlord. He was just like, whatever, you guys are cool. So we were just there. And at the 4.5-year mark of that period, he kind of went, guys like the bank or whoever, I don't know, I think it was his wife, he's like, you guys need to sign a lease.
Yeah.
And I was, 34 going on 35, and feeling like, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
Hadn't really written any books that did anything yet. Had been, kicking going hard at jiu-jitsu, going hard at writing, feeling like I was sort of somewhere, but not really anywhere. Just that middle, I don't know, I guess it's midlife crisis-ish stuff.
I know the feeling.
And I basically said, look, I will, Jen and I sat down, my girlfriend and I sat down, and I said, look, I'll sign a 1-year lease, but at the end of this lease, we are going to do something else. We are going to use this year to make a plan for what the next thing is going to be. Because I'm not going to just sign this lease and then realize, oh my God, another year of my life went by.
Yeah.
I guess I'll sign another, and then just have that rest of my life go off in chunks like that.
Yeah.
And so we said, what are we going to do? And we had kicked around these ideas of doing like a tiny home and stuff like this. And we had kicked around the idea of building a yurt. And
what's a yurt?
A yurt is it's a Mongolian semi-permanent structure. It's made of a lattice that creates the sidewall, and then joists or ceiling joists that make up the roof, and they come to a central point. It's almost like if you took a teepee and then just cut it off vertical.
Okay.
And you see them around.
Yeah.
A little bit on like tiny home shows. People have seen them. People are always like, "Oh, I've seen those on tiny home shows." And our friends had just bought some property, and Jen, I think it was that Jen had at some point sort of, our friends had bought this property, and it was all this property, and they're like, "This is great. You guys should come live on it." And we're like, "Oh yeah, maybe we'll build a yurt on your property." And they're like, "Yeah, do that." And it was all just chit chat at a party, and then we said we got this lease, and I was like, okay, we're going to do something else. And we're like, well, what if we actually did what we said? What if we got a yurt and we built it on their property? And so I was like, okay, you need to go call our friend and see if they are actually serious about doing that.
Yeah.
And I will see if I can find a yurt. And the deal we came up with was, if we can find a used yurt for $4,000, we'll do it. You don't get to say no. You don't get to pull out. If you find one for $4,000, you have to just do it.
Yeah.
But they sell for like 10 new. It's like, so I basically set a price where there's no possible way I'm going to find this. And within 2 weeks, we had found it.
Get out.
And and I was like, literally, I found it online, and Jen was like, oh, what are we going to do? And I was like, I don't think we have a choice. I think something's bad will happen to us if we don't do this.
This is the universe talking right now. Yeah.
So it was in Tennessee. We bought it. We sent $4,000 to these people we didn't know. And we flew down, and it was like a whole debacle with these snowstorms and stuff.
Yeah.
But we rented a U-Haul, threw it all in the back of a U-Haul because it breaks down.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's designed to be put on the back of a cart and hauled by a yak. It's a nomadic people's dwelling.
Yeah.
And ours is not semi-permanent. Ours is permanent, basically. And so we brought it back, and I spent the next year, we got it back in like early January 2017, and I spent the next year basically building it.
Yeah.
Putting the yurt itself up took a day, but building the platform and then building out the interior, because it's all finished inside. So anyway, the point is, that took a lot out of me.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple other things. Like Grandpa was sick. There's a bunch of other stuff. But we reached a point. We also spent the month of May that year in Europe with Steve.
Wow.
Steve had this seminar tour lined up, and I had traveled with Steve to other places to do seminars, but this was sort of the longest Steve adventure. And so we went. It was really cool. We went to we were in Sardinia. Then we went through Venice and Rome, and we went to Croatia. And he taught a instructor certification, a pro trainer certification. Went up and taught at a big fitness summit in Munich, and then down to he does these training for a lifetime and jiu-jitsu for a lifetime camps in Ikaria. Yeah. So we were there, and it was an amazing trip, and really, and I don't want to make it sound like it wasn't, but it was completely exhausting.
It sounds exhausting.
To be like, and to be, because Steve was in his mid 60s at this point, and at a certain point, I had started coming along to be like the bad cop. and the person who could physically do all the things, you know, that Steve had done in his prime.
Yeah.
Because I'm the body or whatever.
Right.
And that's a very stressful thing to walk into a room of sort of like trainers who are like, who the fuck are you?
Yeah.
And then you got to like perform, or you got to go tap that black belt or do whatever.
Yeah.
And I found it very, very, very stressful. And by the end of it, and along with a lot of other frustrations back home in teaching at the fight gym. So by the time we got to the end of that camp, that trip,
yeah,
I kind of went like, I never want to have a conversation about a push-up again. I don't want to, I am so over all, like literally I just remember sitting there and being like, didn't I used to enjoy this?
Yeah.
Like, didn't this used to be fun? Didn't I used to get inspired to do this? And Jen basically said to me like, well, let's go to ground zero. What would inspire you? And I was like, if you told me that I could go train with Rickson, that would inspire me.
Yeah.
I would go train with Rickson, and I don't care what I don't care what Gordon Ryan says about jiu-jitsu. I don't care about this. I don't care about anything. That's the only thing I really would, that's the only thing that moves the needle right now.
Yeah.
And Jen was like, well, how do you do that? I was like, well, you don't. He's Salinger. You can't find him.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, I mean, you might as well Google it and see if you can find anything about it. And so it's like, okay, whatever. Hickson Gracie Seminar 2017. And they had just announced the Hickson Gracie Cup in Albany that fall. And he was going to teach a seminar the night before, the Friday night before. I was like, oh, okay, wow. So I can meet Hickson. Go to the seminar. It's like 2 days before my 35th birthday, or it was the day before. It was wild. And the video of it is on YouTube. And he pulled me out of the crowd, and for like 8-9 minutes, I'm like doing stuff with him in guard. He's talking through this positions. It's like, and I mean, to me, it was like, okay, great, high water mark of my jiu-jitsu life. That's fine. Yeah. And like literally one of the guys I was with, I've told the story before, but literally like a guy I was with came up to me afterward and was like, that was pretty nuts. Like, how do you feel? And I said to him, I don't know, but I think if I say anything about it, I'm going to start crying.
Wow.
It was like, it was really powerful for me. But went up to him afterwards to get our picture taken. And I was like, okay, how do I train with you more? And he's like, well, I don't know. You maybe come to California. I don't know. We have to see. And like kind of sort of blew me off, but he's just Hickson. He's just elusive like that. Yeah. And so I got home and I tracked down somebody who had his contact information. I was like, begged them to give me his contact information. And reached out to him, didn't hear anything, but he had another seminar lined up in Halifax. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go to Halifax.
No
so
shit.
I flew to Halifax. And he came up to me, like he does the thing before a seminar. He walks around, shakes everybody's hand, says, thanks for coming. And he walked up to me and he goes, Scott, right? I go, oh my God, new high water mark. All right. So
he remembered my name.
And so after that, he responded to an email. He sent me his phone number. He's like, just give me a call. And I was like, oh God. So I called him and we started setting up these trips. And Jason and I would fly out to LA and we'd spend a weekend training with him, doing private lessons.
Wow.
Over the course of the weekend. Then COVID hit. Then, I went out a couple more times on my own, and then he started filming stuff, and I happened to be in town, and he was like, come, I'll use you. And so the last few times I've been out, I've been doing those videos.
That's awesome, man.
So that's the long.
That is a cool story, though.
It's kind of wild, right?
I think it's one of those things, like you said, in the fight club, standing outside the door for 3 days before you're allowed in. You got to admire somebody that is just that tenacious. You know what I mean? You're like, okay, I love to come train with you, and you flew to Canada.
Yeah.
Just to get some FaceTime with him. Yeah. I mean, and obviously do the seminar. But dude, I don't know, man. You got to appreciate that as a coach, as a teacher, as anything. Somebody going out of their way that way. That's a connection. You know what I mean? That's really cool.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I feel like he's Hickson. I'm sure people do that stuff for him all the time.
Yeah. But he remembered your name. That's pretty.
I was like, oh my God. So
yeah, man. So I don't want to let too much out of the bag, but I'm very curious about the Chris Howder book. When does that come out?
So we're about, let's call it 85% of the way done with the first draft.
Okay.
And basically it's written in 3 parts, and excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
The Chris and I both pretty happy with part 1. Right now Chris has part 2, and he's going back through it because the way it's written, I don't want to give too much away about the structure, but there's a lot of stuff sort of that he wants to edit and add to and tweak in part 2. And so he's in the process of doing that while I'm writing part 3. And I'm, let's call it halfway, 60% of the way through part 3. And part 3 is going to be, part 2 is definitely the longest part of the book. So part 3 is not going to take as long to finish. And so once I'm done with part 3, I think probably we'll do a swap. He'll get part 3, I'll get part 2. I'll look through what he's written. And once he's done with part 3, we'll have a pretty good draft 1. I'll go back through it, clean it up, whatever needs to happen, tweaking it will happen. And then, so that process can take anywhere from, I don't know, 1 to 6 months. But we're hoping to have it out by the end of this year is the plan.
Oh,
so
okay.
Pretty aggressive timeline.
That is pretty aggressive.
Depending on what kind of shape part 2 is in when he gets it back to me, that's more or less realistic. But the hope is to have it out by the end of this year.
Okay.
And he's looking to do some kind of cool stuff. Like, so one of the things we're going to try to do is, it'll be available in paperback, it'll be available in hardcover, it'll be available in ebook. We're looking at doing an audio book.
That's what I was going to ask you next. The audio side.
The audio side is going to, right now we're looking at me doing it because Chris is a little nervous about reading it.
I can see that. Yeah.
But also looking at he wants to do like limited edition hardcover where he'll do, he'll add art and he'll add different pieces.
I'll buy it right now.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool.
I would buy that right now.
So it's gonna.
I don't even know what's in the book. I'd buy it right now. Yeah,
it should be really neat. Those will end up being available directly from combatbase.com.
Yeah.
And then everything else will probably be kind of same as Richard and Drysdale and these other through Amazon. But yeah, it should be a really interesting book. It's going to be big. It's going to be a big book.
And with all the stuff that he does, because he's an artist, he's a martial artist. He I don't know if he writes poetry, but I bet he does. But how do you decide how much? Okay, so let's just say you're at 3,000 pages or whatever.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
How much of the book actually doesn't make the cut? Like when you're editing, how typically, right? Do you have a sweet spot? Like you like to hit 275 pages, 300 pages ish, or do you have no limit? You just go.
So, for me, if I'm writing a novel, I think 220 to 250 is. I really like that size of a story.
Yeah.
That's me personally. I know that there are people who love, like Game of Thrones was very popular, and people love just getting immersed in a big world, and they don't want that world to end. They want to just keep having more pages.
Yeah.
For me, I like, and I feel the same way about like a 6-episode miniseries is the perfect length of a miniseries for me.
Yeah.
So that's the size of kind of my storytelling, I don't know, sweet spot. But in terms of nonfiction or in terms of, something like Chris's book, the story itself is going to dictate its length, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I don't know, it's like if you, it's a stupid metaphor. But like, I used to say like there are ideas that are like poem-sized ideas.
Yeah.
There are ideas that are short story-sized ideas. There are stories that are novella-sized ideas. There are stories that are novel-sized ideas. And so, you can tell when somebody doesn't have, there's not enough content in this idea itself to make a novel.
Gotcha.
Or
Yeah.
there's too much content in this short story. I have more questions. This needs to be longer. This needs to be a novella. It needs to be a novel.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of it's like every plant sort of grows to its natural right size.
Yeah.
And so with Chris's book, the interesting thing about it is it is by far the longest thing I've ever worked on, but it still feels very concise to me, and it still feels very intelligible to me. And the narrative threads that we're working with, they're very trackable, even though they are disparate, and even though they are involving several different characters. I don't feel like it. To me, it's almost like it's a big book that reads like a small book at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that, I think one of the things that people have consistently said about like Richard's book and with John's book and even Kip's book about the patent system, which has the potential to be very dry.
Yeah.
I think I've gotten pretty good at writing stuff that moves along and moves you forward and doesn't spend a lot of time just talking about the color of the paint on the wall and describing. I don't spend a lot of time with that. Efficiency is my real sort of watchword. And so even, I think if the book ends up being 800, 900 pages, they're theoretically 800, 900 pages that are going to move quickly, but they're also, you're not going to go, well, oh, you could have cut those 20. Those 20 didn't have anything to do with anything. I'm not spending a lot of time I'm not trying to fill pages by any stretch.
Right. Yeah.
I'm trying to, if anything, I'm trying to make it shorter. There's just certain stuff that has to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you talk about being efficient and basically getting to the point, right?
Yep.
And where did that come from? Did you have people that kind of, writers that kind of had the same kind of feel that you liked, or was it something that you developed over time?
Well, yeah. I was obsessed with Hemingway for a long time. And then I got really into Milan Kundera, and I got really into Kafka, and I got really into there's a great French writer named Georges Simenon that he's hugely popular in France, and I didn't know anything about him, but he's fantastic. But these guys are incredibly good at writing just I don't want to say terse, but like you get to the point, you say enough to establish an understanding with a reader, and then you build on that understanding immediately.
Yeah.
I don't just sit here and explain to you something that you already know.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, we got that point. Okay. This point builds on that point. Okay.
Yeah.
You got that point. This point builds on that point.
Yeah. I like that.
And so there's a real formality to the structuring. But I think one of the things that I see as being very that's inextricable in my life is that at the same time that I was focusing so much on writing fiction, I was focusing so much on teaching jiu-jitsu. And so trying to communicate effectively, trying to communicate in an efficient way, trying to communicate in a way that is intelligible, figuring out where your listener or where your reader or your student is how they're seeing the situation, what I need to tell them to change the way they're seeing the situation, what would be a meaningful addition to that understanding. It is very, as I was saying before, it's sort of very reader or very student focused.
Yeah.
And that if I'm gonna ask for your time and attention reading something or listening to something I'm saying, I need to know that it's going to add value. And the only way I really know what adds value to you is if I spend a lot of time thinking about what you know now or what you think now or where you're at now and how I can bring you along.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes I think about, I've described it to people as like, what you need to do, a lot of times people, they're at the end of their story, right? And they want to tell their story, but they don't kind of know how to do it.
Yeah.
I say, what you have to do is you have to go all the way back to where your reader is and take them by the hand and walk them through it.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I had a conversation with a woman one time at a dinner party thing, and she is in, I believe the field is called education design, and it's like beyond curriculum design. It's because there was this situation where you had these professors who were incredibly knowledgeable in their field, and then you had students who didn't know anything about the field, and there was this massive disconnect where the professors kind of just were there as this collection of knowledge that was almost inaccessible because there wasn't they weren't showing the students the path to their knowledge. Yeah, they were just there. Here, I have it. Come get it if you want it. Well, I don't know how to come get it.
Yeah.
So, somebody who's an expert, not at being ignorant and not at being knowledgeable, but knowing how to build paths in between. And that's really what I think a lot of writing is.
Yeah, I like what you said about meeting the reader where they are.
Yeah,
that's really good. And I think like the Worth Defending book, for me it was easy because I love jiu-jitsu. So if you could meet me there, everything else is gravy. Teach me the history of it. Teach me about this guy's life and how it affected him, because there's parallels, right? But you could take that book and just about anybody, jiu-jitsu or not, you could get something out of that book, because it'll meet you where you are. Maybe you have a history that you don't like talking about. So did he.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe someone came along and gave you that little nugget of knowledge that you needed. So did he. Right. Maybe your life changed because of that over time, and you had trials and you saw this evolution of this beautiful thing that you were into. So did he. Right. There's so many parallels, but I love what you said about meeting people where they are, because it's important in teaching. Like you said, when you're teaching jiu-jitsu, you got to meet the white belt where he or she is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And build off of that. And like you said, get to that point. Okay, now we're going to move on. Right. And I love that. I'm going to totally steal that from you.
It's all yours.
But tell me what's in the future for you. I know we talked about Chris's book, but what else is going on? What other projects are you working on?
Got Chris's book. Chris's book is a big thing. Also very excited about just launched Black Market Kimonos.
Yes.
I want to show you this. Like, check that out. That's a whole gi right there.
Wow.
So
this weighs like a pound.
Yeah, lightweight ripstop.
May I open it?
Open it up.
Awesome.
That's my whole A2 gi. So
this is all ripstop.
Yeah.
Wow.
10-ounce ripstop, dries fast, packs down small.
So this is basically for guys like you, travelers.
Yep. People on the road. I'm also, guys who got to travel for business. You got everybody's charging you for carry-ons. Everybody's charging you for everything at this point. If you need to throw a gi in your personal item, I mean, this thing will. So this is I got this A2 in a medium-sized packing cubes. We're also looking at producing packing cubes to go with these.
Oh, nice.
They'll be available very soon. So check out blackmarketkimonos.com if you are a BJJ Nomad or BJJ Road Warrior.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and, we were talking about this earlier, right? Yeah. I used to get made fun of when I'd go on business trips because I had a giant suitcase for a 3-day trip. This would have packed up really nice, man. And you said it dries quick too?
Totally.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it dries out fast.
Beautiful, man.
Yeah, man. Like we flew out to Sedona on like a day's notice and didn't want to, they charge you for everything. So it's like this went in my girlfriend got this little bag. It's like exactly the specifications of what a personal item is. Right. It's like, got this, 2 changes of clothes, toiletries, my belt, it all like
perfect.
Was able to, no extra fees.
I love it. I love it, man. Well, listen, let everybody know how they can get in touch with you. Obviously, blackmarketkimonos.com, right? But how else can people find you and learn about you and look at the books that you put out?
So you can find my jiu-jitsu website as enclavejujitsu.com, ENCLAVE, jiu-jitsu.com. I'm also on all social media or Instagram, Facebook, YouTube at Enclave Jiu Jitsu. I also have a website for my writing, scottburrauthor.com.
Yep.
And I also have like a website that's sort of because I did a few other things. So there's one called someguyfromohio.com. That's almost just a link tree.
Yeah.
But yeah. And check out Black Market Kimonos at Black Market Kimonos on social media. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So, all that stuff.
Awesome, man. And
I'm available for drive into your location, fly into your location, seminars and classes and whatever.
Yeah, definitely. I would love that. Yeah, we were talking about we were exchanging text messages, and you had said that you were going to be in California. You were going to make a stop in Joshua Tree. I didn't know you were camping there.
Yeah,
and then you drove straight out here to be on the show.
Yeah,
dude, thank you so much for doing that.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. And I've got autographed books. I don't know if you've got one, but please support Scott and his endeavors. And you can get a lot out of these books, man. Worth defending. I can't wait to get into opening the closed guard, but
That's
promised,
a really cool book.
I promised I wouldn't open that book until I finished my other one, because there's so many unread books in this house, or half-read books in this house. I'm gonna get to it, but it gives me a little incentive, right?
That was a really cool project to get to be a part of. I mean, there's a ton of fascinating information in that book.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, listen, I would love to do this again once the Howder book comes out.
Oh,
and I won't make you drive all the way out here.
Well, hopefully I'll just be out here. Yeah.
That would be awesome. Yeah,
coming back from LA again or something.
Anytime you're coming back from LA, I'd love to have you in, man. Maybe get some training sessions in. All right, guys, if you love the podcast, please like and subscribe. Give us a review on Spotify and everywhere else. Everywhere else you can find follow us on Instagram. And don't look at our website because it sucks right now. We're working on it. But thank you, guys. Scott, thank you again, brother.
Thank you, man.
Awesome.